Imagine standing on the shore of Yellowstone Lake at dawn. The water is glassy, the air sharp with pine and cold. A grizzly bear wades into a shallow tributary stream, eyes fixed on something darting just below the surface. It lunges. It comes up with a cutthroat trout clamped in its jaws. You're watching an ecosystem come back to life. But to understand why that moment matters, why researchers who spent decades tracking this place stopped and stared when they started seeing it again, you have to go back to a quieter catastrophe, one that started with a single fish that had no business being here at all. At one feeder stream called Clear Creek, more than 70,000 Yellowstone cutthroat trout were counted in 1978 alone. By 2007, that number had fallen to 538. That is not a dip, that is a collapse, and it did not happen by accident. Illegal introduction of lake trout by bucket biologists sometime in the 1980s caused a massive crash in the cutthroat population. Most predators cannot catch lake trout as a substitute. Lake trout live in deep water, grow large, and have no natural predators in the park. They can live into their 30s and 40s in Yellowstone Lake if not removed. Think about what that means. You swapped out one fish for another, but the replacement lived somewhere unreachable. The cutthroat had been the bridge between the lake and everything living around it. Remove the bridge, and the whole surrounding world starts to fray. Yellowstone cutthroat trout are a keystone species, providing a critical aquatic terrestrial linkage. Their spawning runs pushed biomass from the lake into shallow waters and tributary streams each spring. When lake trout expanded and cutthroat declined by roughly 90%, that movement collapsed. Nutrients that once flowed annually into tributaries remained trapped in deep offshore water. Researchers estimated that stream microbes removed 10 times more ammonium excreted by cutthroat trout before the lake trout invasion than in the mid-2000s. The streams were being starved of the chemistry they needed to function. Now picture a grizzly bear in that same window. Every spring, bears near Yellowstone Lake had relied on the spawning runs, a predictable protein-rich feast arriving right when they needed calories most. The estimated number of spawning cutthroats consumed annually by grizzlies fell from roughly 21,000 in the late 1980s to about 2,200 in the late 1990s to just 300 in the late 2000s. By 2009, cutthroat trout were no longer a measurable part of grizzly diets. Elk made up 84% of their menu instead. The bears had not disappeared. They had been forced to reorganize their entire lives around a different food source, wandering farther, competing harder, preying on elk calves in ways that rippled into that population too. Now, look up from the water. Ospreys feed primarily on cutthroat trout. Bald eagles depend on them for roughly 23% of prey during breeding season. Historically, more than half of all breeding pairs of both species in the park nested near Yellowstone Lake. Osprey pairs nesting there fell by approximately 85%. Of the ospreys that still nested along the lake, none were seen foraging on cutthroat trout. Some traveled as far as 5 miles to other drainages, where cutthroats remained. Bald eagle nesting success dropped from 56% in the late 1980s to 0 in 2009. Zero, not low, zero. Otters shifted their diets to long-nosed suckers and amphibians. The otter density recorded in 2008, one animal per 8 miles of shoreline, was among the lowest ever reported for a river otter population. Every one of these collapses, the bears, the ospreys, the eagles, the otters, The stream chemistry traces back to one species going missing from shallow water. One fish, one link, and the whole web sagged. So here is a question worth sitting with. If you had been a park manager in 1994 when lake trout were first discovered in Yellowstone Lake, would you have predicted a cascade this wide? Would you have known to look at osprey nesting success, or nitrogen levels in tributary streams, or grizzly bear diet composition? Let me know in the comments below, because what happened next is where the story gets genuinely surprising. A lake trout suppression program began in 1995. For years, the results were discouraging. Suppression efforts did not curtail lake trout population growth or lake-wide expansion. An adaptive management strategy developed in 2010 scaled the program up dramatically. In 2020 alone, crews gill-netted 326,000 non-native lake trout from Yellowstone Lake. Since 1995, 3.7 million lake trout have been removed. Yellowstone has invested more than $20 million in this effort. Then, slowly, the numbers turned. Available evidence suggests gill netting reduced adult lake trout biomass, which carries the largest predatory effect on cutthroat, by more than 79%. The invasive species has been in decline since 2012. Long-term monitoring shows a substantial increase in cutthroat trout abundance. Individual fish weights doubled, probably because of reduced density. The fish were getting bigger and healthier. They were starting to push back into their old spawning streams, and then the cascade ran in reverse. Biologists began documenting grizzly bears feeding on spawning cutthroats in the spring again. Bear use of tributary streams increased as the fish returned, not because anyone relocated the bears or taught them anything new. The fish came back, and the bears remembered. The ecological memory of this place, encoded in animal behavior, switched back on. The nitrogen started flowing again. As cutthroat numbers climbed, the chemical pulse began returning to waterways, feeding microbes, feeding insects, feeding the whole bottom of the food web. Osprey reproduction correlated positively with cutthroat abundance. As the trout rebounded, the birds followed. What surprised researchers was not just that the ecosystem responded, it was how quickly and how completely the reversal tracked the fish. The assumption had been that ecosystems disrupted at this scale tend to settle into new equilibria, that bears would stay adapted to elk, ospreys would stay gone, streams would stay chemically depleted. Instead, the moment cutthroat started coming back, species after species reoriented toward the old pattern. The prevailing expectation in ecology had been that cascades weaken as they cross from water to land. What Yellowstone showed is that, under the right conditions, a pristine enough system, a keystone species central enough, those effects do not attenuate. They travel. And when the cause is reversed, so does the recovery. As Todd Coyle, leader of Yellowstone's Native Fish Conservation Program, put it, "The park will never completely eradicate lake trout, but the return on investment is the ecological restoration of Yellowstone cutthroat trout, sustainable angling, and a chance to glimpse a river otter, osprey, or bear catching a cutthroat." That is what a keystone species actually means in practice, not a concept in a textbook. A grizzly bear, waist-deep in a cold stream at dawn, pulling a trout from water that was empty for 20 years. An osprey nest on a shoreline that had gone silent. Nitrogen-feeding microbes in a stream starved of it for a generation. Yellowstone Lake did not just recover a fish, it recovered a conversation. The 1,000-year-old back and forth between water and land, between predator and prey, between a spawning run and everything that showed up to meet it, and the fact that it could recover at all, at the speed it did, is perhaps the most important thing this place has ever taught us. If you want to understand how ecosystems actually work, not the simplified version, but the real, messy, interconnected truth, Yellowstone's Cutthroat Trout story is one of the most important natural experiments on Earth. Subscribe so you don't miss what we cover next, and share this with someone who thinks conservation is only ever about saving one thing at a time.